ice was stacking up, and it looked bad.
Then all I heard my husband says, "Here it comes."
I'd never seen the water that high before.
The water's coming up, and my house is needing help.
I realized that we couldn't get out of the house except by a boat.
And my daughter kept asking me, are we okay? Are we okay?
To the world, it was just a small town of 500, but to those 500, it was their whole world. In May 2013, a stubborn ice jam on the Yukon River sent floodwater spilling over its banks into the small Alaskan town of Galena. A sharp bend in the river about 18 miles from Galena triggered the jam by preventing a large sheet of winter ice from flowing downstream.
One of the things my agency does every spring is we partner with the National Weather Service to do a program called River Watch. And we have a National Weather Service hydrologist, one of our emergency managers, and a charter aircraft. And we follow the breakup front of the Yukon River from the border of Canada all the way to the mouth. This year, the breakup happened very late. And normally my section of the river is from Tanana down to Grayling or maybe a little bit farther. We started our operations for the Galena area on the 26th, which was the day before it flooded. And when we flew in, the water was higher than I'd ever seen it at Galena itself, even before it started flooding.
The blockage began on May 25th, and the ice and floodwater stretched more than 20 miles from the choke point by May 28th. Galena residents saw water surge more than 15 feet in the span of one night.
This year, the ice jam was due to a bunch of in-place ice at Bishop Rock, holding back all of the broken up chunk ice that was coming back down the river. The rivers, they break up starting from upstream, working their way downstream. And as the stuff's coming downstream, if the downstream ice isn't soft enough to just break up, crumple up, and move on, it'll sometimes hold that ice back, all the broken up stuff. And this year, it was just upstream of Bishop Rock. There was about a mile and a half, 2 mile wide section of ice diagonally across the river that was holding back all the chunk ice. And as the ice built up behind it, it kept moving farther and farther and farther upstream, and that was holding the water back, keeping it from going down to where the actual jam was, the start of the jam. So after the first day, the water at the in-place ice that was holding everything back, the water was so low it couldn't break up and float off. There was no water to lift it, to move it out. And as the water was getting backed up behind all the chunk ice, it would spill out into the trees, and it created a giant lake on either side of the river. I believe it was 3 or 4 miles wide on either side, and I don't know how long. There's a really nice satellite image that shows this giant lake out there.
We noticed that the ice was moving, and then at one time we seen a big ice cake going down almost all the way across the river, and it sure didn't look good, but it kept moving, and by 3 o'clock or so, 4 o'clock, it started slowing down, and then we know that it must be jamming up further down, Bishop Rock maybe, and that's just what it did too.
All of a sudden the water was coming up faster than seems like it should have been, and people started to panic a little bit. I brought my load of elders to the boat where they were launching to bring the elders out. First it was elders And we got to the place, and we had the elders that were from the elders' home, so they were sort of, some of them couldn't really help themselves, so we had to help them out of the car into the boats, and from there it was just people coming and going, and kids sort of crying, screaming. It was just like a chaos in the beginning.
It was a much later spring than normal. It was really, really cold, and then suddenly it was clear skies and 80 degrees. And all that snow started melting really fast. The river ice, especially there at Bishop Rock, it just could not rot fast enough. When it's still clear and blue and solid, when the water pours in the river from the snow melt, it'll lift up the ice and break it free from the shore, but it's still in the giant sheets, and they don't crumble when they reach an obstacle. If it's had a chance to slowly warm up, it'll start rotting, turning into candle ice, and then when that gets lifted up and hits something, it crumbles and keeps going. So this year, in a couple of spots, it just didn't have enough time to rot in place before it got washed out. It was just too strong.
In the area of Bishop Rock, the winds were clearing the snow off the ice, causing it to freeze even thicker. Disaster was mere moments away.
So when the flood started happening, my yard is technically above the 100-year floodplain, and so when we built the house, we were thinking, wow, we made the pilings just way too tall. This is stupid because I got to build extra stairs. While the flood was going on, I was thinking, wow, this is stupid. I should have added 2-3 feet to the pilings. It was easy to see the water coming from the front, but there's a lower lake behind our house, and so the stream started coming down through the middle of our yard, and we started kind of making a ditch for it so that it would make the least amount of damage as possible, because that's as high as the water is going to get. And that seemed to be the recurring theme always in conversation, was it won't get any higher. It can't get any higher than this. So we left our snow machine where it was because it was on high ground. My daughter's go-kart, we left that where it was because it's on high ground and wasn't running. So we moved our truck on the other side of the driveway just in case we had to go someplace, and we put all our tools in the back in case we had to rebuild. Got the four-wheeler on the other side so that we could have transportation, and then shortly after, the flood water continued to come through our backyard and started washing our driveway out. So it was impossible to take anything across our driveway anymore at that point anyway, so it was too late. The road started getting water in it. It must have been, 2 feet deep. We got the truck and the four-wheeler out, and we took those to the school because that's where people were parking stuff, and that was where people were gathering, as far as emergency center goes.
As the day was going on, I moved the car to a higher spot and started moving some stuff around, and then we started getting phone calls from different people in town saying, hey, my house is totally surrounded by water, and it didn't look that bad around our place yet. The church parsonage was already sitting, had water all the way around it. The garage and the parsonage were 2 islands all by themselves, and my brother, who's the pastor, was kind of ferrying things back and forth, and just started noticing a lot more phone calls, a lot more people panicking and talking about needing to move their stuff. And so then we were caught in the dilemma of, well, we'd already been cut off. We're at the furthest end from the airport that you can live, and the river water had already cut across the road, so we couldn't go towards the Newtown site, and we couldn't go towards the higher ground, which is actually towards the dump, because the week before, that road had been cut off by the flood, or the water coming out of Beaver Creek had just washed out the road that way, so we were kind of cut off. Apparently the main road was acting like a dike and was holding the river back, but it finally washed out and water was just pouring in across the street from us, and the water came up about 6 feet in about 30 minutes on that side, and then started washing across the road, and that's when we know this is getting bad.
We had 4 big hens, and they were in this coop behind me, and so I ran, opened the door, and So I grabbed them, one under each arm, and then I ran and threw them on the dry ground and ran back and got the other two. And then before that even happened, we were watching the water coming down across the main road down here at the other end of our road. And we actually have pictures of people just sitting there on their four-wheelers watching the water go across the road because we're cut off from all the the rest of the town. I was waiting for everybody to get across, and then some other guys helped push the little boat off of the sandbar.
Breakup is a fun time around Galena because everybody. It's a small town, so there is no traffic except during breakup because everybody's driving the road watching what the river is doing. And everybody was doing that this spring. I mean, they were all excited about breakup, and little things were happening and things were funny, and how it was fun to watch this and watch that, and it just got ugly.
Yeah, on Monday around noon, the main road, our road that runs along the river, had got washed underwater. And about noon, and then about 2 o'clock, both roads were blocked off by water and ice. And so the only way to get out of the community was to be run by boat down here. We're locked down on this part of town. There's a couple parts of town, and there's the older part of town or otherwise access here at the airport, and then the new part of town. All of Monday we had, both sides of town had power, and then at about, I think it was around 1 or 2 o'clock, the second road washed out, and by 3 or 4 we were both unlimited power supply. We were running people were coming down and getting unscheduled flights till about 6 o'clock at night. And then at 6 o'clock at night, the state had not even officially declared us an evacuation site, which was kind of interesting. So then local community members and tribes stepped up to start paying for charters to get people out of our community. The state's opinion was that when the water comes up over the dike, which is the dike surrounds our whole airport, then the community will be under official evacuation. The problem with that is, once the water comes up over our dike, there's not going to be a runway. So there were a couple of charters that the city of Galena and Tanana chiefs stepped up and paid for. And that got, by the end of Monday night, there was probably 80 people out of our community, of a population of 450 to 500 people. And then from about 8 o'clock on, after all the commercial carriers couldn't fly anymore due to pilot requirements, people started volunteering and flying in on their own. If it wasn't for the connections of some local people in our community with the Bible Church and their affiliation with other church organization aircraft, I don't think there would have been as many people that would have been evacuated.
So I wound up being on the north side of the dike with my family, and after the evacuation of mostly all the people from uptown and the old town site, they went till about 2 o'clock in the morning. Planes noisy, but they were so happy to see some of these people leaving, because it was quite a mess by that time. It was kind of strange. The water was so swift, and you had to be careful.
The tribal chief requests assistance in evacuating residents. A plane is sent from Fairbanks to evacuate vulnerable residents, such as medically fragile elders. The old town in the lower part of Galena has been flooded, and the road to the airport is also underwater, but residents have been ferrying people through the flooded area despite the danger. Power has been turned off in parts of town as a precaution. The old school and Air Force Base, which sit on higher ground, are being used as a temporary shelter. Many of the evacuees made it out on private planes or private planes organized through the church and local residents prior to any emergency response units being mobilized by the state.
In April, our community always has a flood meeting, and it's to discuss our plans. Like, what if the Yukon floods? What if it's just a little bit? What if it's huge? So in that plan is evacuation points, and the Galena City School District has both of their school campuses on that plan. So in Newtown, people would be going to the city school, or in Old Town, and then in Newtown, people could get to the Galena Interior Learning Academy campus, and that campus did not ever flood. So that was crucial. We were able to have people who were evacuated by boat and got to the airstrip when no planes were there. They were able to stay on that campus. Also, I believe that some of our community members were able to get a generator started over there so that power could continue. So Galena City School District just opening up and being willing to let people come in and plan that people could come in to have shelter, that's pretty huge. Even right down to using toilet paper. I mean, if we didn't have that, some of the moms with young children wouldn't have had a place to stay while they waited for their evacuation flights.
When we left our house, well, we made the decision to leave our house when I realized that we couldn't get out of the house except by a boat. So I got shown the kids in a canoe and then waded them through chest-deep water over to the road, and then we got over to the school. And I came back to start trying to tend to some other things here at the house while Shell took care of the kids at the school.
Yeah, we just waited at the school, just not really sure what the whole plan was, and then discussions started happening where we were thinking, okay, elders need to get out of Galena, and so we also need to get out as many women with little kids as we can, and so we actually helped start a sign-up list for women with young children who needed to get out and get to a safer place. So we had planned to evacuate by plane, and everything quickly changed by the time we boated over to the airport. We were one of the first boats with little kids to get over to the airport, and driving in a school bus, pulling over to the airport. We saw one plane, and at first I didn't find that too alarming because I just thought, well, there's another plane coming. We had been told there were 2 planes, and we would get on the second plane, the elders would go out first. So quickly changed. We got into the airport, and everybody looked really stressed, the employees of ERA that I saw, and we were quickly told that there had been some kind of miscommunication, there weren't any planes coming. And so that was kind of a shock to our system. We just thought, okay, we're just going to be getting over to the airport, we'll just fly out of here, and planes would just keep coming. We just assumed there was like a plan in place, but there wasn't. And so I spoke with the airport manager and said, hey, look, I know a lot of people who are pilots, and some of them have their own planes. Is it okay if I just contact them and have them funnel through you to coordinate getting here, and like how many people they would need to be picking up and that kind of thing? And he said, sure, just call anybody you know that has planes, because we don't have a plan for right now. There's no more planes coming.
Then once they realized that the water was starting to come up even higher, it was starting to, with the wind and the water being so high, it was starting to slop the edge of the dike and starting to come over in places. People were trying to fill in the gravel. They finally declared an evacuation site and said, all right, let's get everybody down here to the airport. So we communicated through radios to get as many people down here as we could, and they took about 80 people out finally. But I mean, ERA came in and hauled out a couple of Dash 8 loads, which haul 29 people. They're 1900s, all these big aircraft, and so it made it pretty amazing. I look back at it as moving about 400 people in 2 days is pretty amazing.
When I loaded my wife and kids in the boat, I thought everything was good. I thought they were safe. And about 3 hours later, I got a phone call, and she said, they're not sending any more planes. I was like, what do you mean they're not sending any more planes? And she said, I don't know, they're not sending any more planes. So I went and chatted with somebody that was there on the ground, a state person, and he said, well, our protocol is that we shelter in place, and we've determined that this is not a life and death, type of situation. And I was upset, to say the least. It was actually the most helpless I've ever felt, because I couldn't get to my wife and kids. I mean, they're 2 miles away from me, separated by 38-degree temperature water and icebergs. My boat was swamped. I couldn't get to them. And so I said, you know, have you been calling missionaries? And she said, yeah. And that was it. I said, well, okay, well, I'll try to get to you as soon as I can. And probably about 30 minutes later, I got a phone call from a guy who was in contact with Missionary Aviation Repair Center in Soldotna. And he said, hey, Chris, I need to talk with you. I need to find out, you know, your perspective. Is this really a dangerous situation? And I began to describe the situation of what we were working with, how fast the water was rising, how quickly the ice was coming in, and told him by every definition I have, I mean, there's people that I know in town that cannot get out right now. They can't get out of their houses. And so I walked over to the city manager and our mayor and told him what was being offered and said, you know, we've got several missionary pilots who are ready to go right now. We just need to know, do you guys want the planes? And they said, yes, send the planes. I think it was a total of, it was a Casa, 3 King Airs, a Caravan, 2 206s, and a 180 that launched. And it was the fastest mobilization of their organizations that they've ever had as far as a launch to respond to a need. And we were under the understanding it was they were just going to come, make one flight, bring people to where they needed to be to safety, and then fly home. And so again, I still was not planning on leaving. We just wanted to get the elders that still were here and the women and children out. But after they had come and made one of their flights, and we knew that families were, you know, getting safe, we heard word that they said that they would make as many flights as we needed to get as many people to safety as possible. And so these pilots flew literally all night long, getting, I don't know what the exact number is, it was somewhere in the ballpark of about 150 to 180 people that they flew out in the event until there was literally no one left that said that they wanted to go that was at least accessible. It was 24 hours later that the state sent in a C-130 after the water had risen an additional several feet, and several other people were able to get out of their homes who had been isolated that whole time, and they ended up taking a much smaller number of people, maybe around 30 people, and then a lot of dogs and cats, and evacuated them out 24 hours after the initial evacuation. And I got on the very last missionary flight in the last seat that they had available, because I knew I was going to be in serious trouble if my wife knew that there was an empty seat and I wasn't sitting in it.
So the city called Era Aviation and paid for a couple planes. The city did that. And then contacts through the Bible Church started calling, you know, Mission Aviation, Samaritan's Purse, a bunch of the groups that have airplanes, and those organizations didn't ask who was going to pay for it. They just showed up. And it's not cheap to run an airplane. You know, maintenance and fuel are expensive enough, let alone the plane. And they never asked where the money was coming from. And so they just started sending planes, and people got out.
It was a real comfort to me to know that there were people in Galena who were looking out for my kids. I was 300 miles away from Anchorage, and nothing I could do to help my kids. But I knew that there were people who were capable of running boats and making wise decisions at the drop of a hat. And so I knew that they would be okay.
That's when we found out that a C-130 was supposed to be coming in, and we had no communication with the outside world at that time, so we were able to race down and tell the other people at the end of the road that the C-130 was coming, and that was the last plane that was going to be coming, so if people wanted to leave, they could.
As residents were evacuated and floodwaters finally began to subside, the Galena flood is officially declared a disaster zone and recorded as the largest natural disaster to occur in Alaska since the 1964 earthquake. State officials and the village tribal council, along with Galena residents, began to turn their attention to recovery, cleanup, and restoration of Galena.
I woke up in the morning and the Lord just showed me the scripture. It was Job 8:42 to read that, so I read it, and it was saying how Job, you know, he went through all this stuff, and that at the end he got more than he ever had. He got more. His daughters were more beautiful than the first daughters, and And I started sharing that with other people, but I don't think they really understood what I was trying to say, but I was just so excited about that. I said, look, I said, Galena's going to rebuild. I said, we're going to have more than we ever had. And some of them just sort of looked at me very strangely. And some, especially this one lady, she lost quite a bit, so I was trying to console her, and I was telling her this. And then I shared that with other people. And I just believe that Galena will rebuild. We lost a lot, but we'll get more than what we ever lost. And that's a faith that I have.
Everything had to go from the first floor. Everything had to be tossed. And like everyone else, we were just mucking and throwing and ripping out walls, and everything was going out the front door and over the rail, where it stayed in piles and mountains all around town and until the crews could come and start taking away the debris. Driving around and seeing everyone's house and the damage that they had sustained was probably harder than actually looking at my own damage, because this I kind of had a handle on in my mind. I knew what had to be done next, and looking at what everyone else had gone through was really difficult. And being reminded of it on every corner and in front of everyone's houses was just a constant reminder of the devastation. And even though the weather was nice then, and it didn't feel like winter was too close, we knew it was coming. So we knew timeline-wise what had to be done to recover.
While emergency responders from the state of Alaska and the Federal Emergency Management Agency were working to organize the recovery, Galena residents were already well on their way to rebuilding their homes.
I'm Andy John. We are FEMA Corps. We are out of the Sacramento Pacific Region campus. We are a volunteer group serving for 10 to 11 months a year. And basically we are here to support FEMA, but also support the communities that we get deployed to. We started out in New York, helping with Hurricane Sandy. And then we were excited to be able to come to Alaska and serve the communities here. We weren't sure where we were going to be. We knew we were going to be at the JFO in Anchorage. And then we were told we were going to the remote community of Galena. And we were briefed on what's going on out here, the flooding, the ice jam, the community, everything out here, the agencies out here, the volunteer agencies out here, FEMA, the state, you name it. We were briefed on it, and then we deployed out here on August 29th. And basically what we've been doing out here is supporting a lot of the shelter operations, feeding operations, transportation for volunteers. Specifically in the shelters, we worked with a lot of the residents who aren't able to get back in their homes yet, whether it be they can't be heated, plumbing, sewers not hooked up yet, you name it. But we are taking care of them as much as we can inside the shelters. And then the feeding crew comes in and makes sure they're well fed for the winter and that sort of thing. One thing that we've also been able to do is working with the dogs here in Alaska. A lot of dogs were evacuated because of the flood. And part of our team has been able to work with some shelters in Fairbanks, the Air Force Civil Engineers, to work on a plan to get the dogs back. And as of 2 days ago, all dogs, at least that were evacuated at Fairbanks, were brought back to Galena and repatriated with their owners. So that's been really, really neat to see happen too and work with. Other than that, we've been here for a while, and we're looking forward to the next month and continuing to serve the community.
You see everyone displaced, and you know like how difficult it is for them, or you think that you're going to know, but then seeing it firsthand and seeing a lot of people that were really determined to stay here throughout the winter and just not having that opportunity or option to be able to stay here was really disheartening. We were also doing dispatch, as she was saying that she was doing earlier. She was actually doing it for us because we were gone. The community has been so helpful for us, like getting us wherever we need to go, because there's no addresses, so you just have to know the names of everyone that lives in all the houses. So it's been tough, and working with all the different volunteer agencies that have been here, and we were working firsthand with AmeriCorps Conservation Corps that just left today, so we were sad to see them leave, and they've been a great help. Everyone's just like really come together, and it just like warms your heart.
I'm involved in an organization called United Methodist Volunteer and Mission, and we do a couple things. We do actually some of the work where we come into the house and help tear out the things that have been damaged, or take out, furniture or anything that needs to be taken out. We do that. The other piece that we do, and what we did here, was the rebuild part. So we pulled a team together from 4 different states. Actually, we came from Colorado, we came from California, from Washington, and Oregon.
Everything was gone. We had wall-to-wall carpeting, in which all had to come out. As far up as the water hit, that's everything that was ruined. Even if it got a little bit on there, it was ruined. 39 inches on the window, you can still see it there. It was over the rail. The one aerial picture I did get of the house, just basically you could see, you couldn't see the rail, but you could see the roof. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's when it really hit how deep this water was.
One of the most remarkable stories that I heard about during the course of the initial days of the flood was the group of people, Galena residents, who stayed out on the dike road and did repair work on it to make sure that the river water would not go over the dike road. They used heavy equipment, they used shovels and gravel, and in 85-degree sunshine with mosquitoes everywhere and very little drinkable water, they were the ones who made it so the runway could be used to bring in critical supplies.
Right now we're sitting at right around 220 volunteers that we've brought in over the last 14 weeks. At somewhere around just shy of 10,000 man hours, about 1.25 years worth of labor that we've done in the last 14 weeks. And we're sitting on the precipice of winter, and there's still a lot of jobs that are needing to get done. So as official volunteers are pulling out, we're kind of being brought into some of those things and trying to figure out how do we help people get into winter.
It was nearly 5 weeks after the flood when Galena was declared a federal disaster area. And before that happened, there was a need for a place for volunteers to sleep and be fed. And the church was one of the very few facilities that had a kitchen and enough space for accommodating volunteers in that way. So there were nights where we had 45 people sleeping in cots at the church, and there was just stuff piled everywhere because the church had had some damage as well. So there were chairs piled everywhere, and books and food and sleeping bags and mosquito nets and bug dope, along with building supplies just piled everywhere in the church. And it was this really cool thing to see the church being turned into a response camp.
And some of it's going to be, some of it's going to be really challenging because there's, some of these houses still have just tremendous amounts of work to be done in them. And we're going to try as we have opportunity to bring more volunteers in to move forward with it. The plan is for next year we'll continue with volunteers and hopefully be able to have them more specifically assigned to have a volunteer team that is coming here to work on a particular person's house rather than just spreading them out over a lot of different things, but that they'll be concentrated on the rebuild. And it's been really cool because from the standpoint of what we've been able to accomplish, we're not operating with really any red tape and have been able to meet needs, specific needs that either bureaucracy or law or whatever the way that funding can manage things, we've been able to meet those in ways that are just very common sense. And we didn't have to be particular about whether or not this was a native or non-native or whether they were employed or unemployed or a renter or whatever. If it helped somebody get into a home for winter, we were able to help do that.
Some guys from Peninsula Power Sports that own the Peninsula Power Sports in Soldotna, they volunteered their time to come out and early, right after about a couple weeks after the flood happened, and volunteered their time to go around town and help people try to dry out their machines and try to get them so that they don't rust and all that kind of stuff. So we got them running, but after sitting the rest of the summer, I pull on it and they won't crank over anymore. This one still runs, so I may pull these ones apart and try to rebuild the engines. But yeah, after the Peninsula Power Sport guys worked on 15 snow machines and got 13 of them going. The other 2 were, they just had so much mud inside the motors that it would have had to have been pull the motor totally apart. So the goal was to get as many machines cleaned up as we could.
There were some people who wanted to come volunteer in Galena, but either didn't have the resources or it was too soon and they weren't allowed to come back. And so some of those people decided, hey, I know how to cook. So they made casserole after casserole after casserole meals and just sent them out to Galena for the initial volunteers that had come in, for families that might still be there.
The AmeriCorps group would come in teams, of, I'm not really sure how many, between 12 and 20 maybe, and stay for a certain amount of time and do whatever was on the list for them to do. They're just great people.
I mean, honestly, if I'm to give credit to like federal organizations coming in, they did make it possible for AmeriCorps to come in. And those young people coming in, they were pretty amazing because there were people that were really discouraged and they were tired of working on their own, and these people came from the outside that, why should they be in Galena? AmeriCorps came in and they were willing to get dirty with you, and they were willing to take some of the nasty jobs. The houses that were low, they crawled underneath them, and as we're all working on the houses, one of the things that was one of the jokes that we'd say to each other is like, this is mud. What we're standing in, this is mud. It's just mud, because you knew it was mixed in with that mud, and those kids were crawling through that mud and doing some nasty jobs. So they were really like rock stars, and anytime a community member came in contact with an AmeriCorps member, it was like, wow, you guys are doing great. We're so happy that you're here. And they didn't know how to take that. Like, well, we hear that, but and people were very sincere about that. And AmeriCorps they did some amazing work. They made some things really happen.
Resources in Galena were very limited as far as there wasn't water, there wasn't food, there wasn't sanitation. And so it was basically one of those deals of saying, we don't want people to come back, because it's not safe. And so that was posing a problem for us, because we did want to come back and wanted to be able to help and wanted to be able to figure out how to best serve. And yeah, we were at a community meeting, and there was a representative from Tanana Chiefs that specifically sought me out and said, hey, are you Chris Kopp? Are you the pastor of the Bible church? And I said, yeah. And she said, oh, they're asking for you to come back in Galena. And I said, really? And she said, yeah, they're you and then the 2 shop teachers, and they listed a couple of other people that had specific skill sets, and they're saying they would really like for you guys to get back to Galena as soon as you can. And we've got some flights that are lined up if you can get on those. And anyways, it was just absolutely blew me away, because there it was, the Lord answering, how are you going to get back? Or Lord, how are we going to get back in the midst of this, and to be seen as at least a valuable enough resource to show back up. I mean, for them to be asking for us to come back was really an honor.
There is no foolproof, safe place to live, and the volunteers have been, I think, nice enough to realize that people live out here because this is what we do. It's sometimes hard to understand why we live out here, because we don't. Milk is like $7-8 a gallon, and gasoline is $7-8 a gallon. We don't have a mall, we don't have a movie theater, we don't have a coffee shop, we don't have a restaurant. So it's hard to understand why we live out here, but there's a small number of us that have decided that this is what life is supposed to be, and so this is where we live. And the people that have come out to help us they may not completely understand why we live here, but they've just absolutely been gracious in serving.
In Galena, just the normal way of life is that if someone has a challenge, a problem that they can't meet on their own, the community comes around together, surround that person, and we help, whether it's someone who just found out they have cancer and they don't have the money for treatments. we get together and we help raise money. Those just like a small example of something that happens all the time in Galena. We just come together when there's a crisis. So when the flood happened, it was just natural that all of us who were in Galena at the time or not, that we're like, what can we do? Let's take care of business now. Let's do what we can, because winter is only a couple months away. So if we want to be living at home again, we can't wait for anyone.
And like I said, there's a lot, everybody cares about them, each other.
Galena Bible Church has gotten over many, I think there are most of these groups that came in stayed here and were eating out of the Bible Church here, and going into the communities to help, into the community to help the people, help them whatever way they needed to be helped, you know. So they did quite a bit things for Galena.
I saw Galena Bible Church have a big impact on a lot of the technical issues that's needed here in Galena. They brought in some boiler technicians, they brought in plumbers, electricians, a lot of skilled labor that was needed here. And they also brought in a lot of donations, material, which was needed. We couldn't get through the regular female group. So,
had they not responded the way they did, most of Galena would not have recovered the way that we have so far. Maybe we couldn't have done it alone. So it's been wonderful.
It would be virtually impossible to be able to thank every single person who helped in the recovery process and continues to help in the recovery process. But as a community in Galena, we are so grateful for every moment, every dollar that was spent to help us in our time of need.
Yeah, they walk away saying how blessed they have been to help out here, and it's just, the help that we've gotten has been amazing, and we wouldn't be able to make it without that.
Galena residents continue to rebuild and persevere despite the unpredictable living conditions, federal red tape, and financial hardships brought on by the flood. To the world, it was just a small town of 500, but to those 500, it was their whole world.